Welcome, everyone, to the Sonoma Spiel. My name is Tim Zahner with the Sonoma Valley Visitors Bureau. I want you to make a note that something historical happened today. I don't know what it is because it's currently present time. However, something historical is going to happen today that later people will talk about. And that's the weird thing about history. It's a river that's always flowing. And we're casting into that river and pulling out bad analogies and trying to figure out how to make an intro to a podcast. So today, I have a very special guest because I know every week I have a very special guest and I say, oh, here's a chef. Oh, here's a winemaker. Here's somebody who's talking about some sort of art stuff. But today I have somebody who specializes in local history, and they are casting into that river of time and pulling out little historical fish for us to enjoy. I have a very special guest. This time I mean it. Not only is he a FID PhD, not in history, but he's also one of our top volunteers at the Visitor Center. I have Travis Wagner, local historian. Travis, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Tim.
Good. Do I have to call you Dr. Travis?
You don't have to.
Dr. G.
Just don't call me Mr. I always.
You don't like that?
When students said that, I was like, you can call me Travis or Doctor. But
Oh, really?
Yes.
I love that.
And hey, they used to say, hey.
Hey, Doc.
No,
hey,
that's not
Mister.
gonna work.
Hey, guy. So, Travis, you're probably your biggest claim to fame. I've already tipped it off. You are one of the volunteers of the Visitor Center.
Yes, I am. I think almost 5 years now.
Yeah, I think we're going to get you the 5-year anniversary gift.
Oh, good. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's a sticker that says "I Heart Sonoma Valley."
I've heard about them. They're very elusive and prestigious. Yeah.
We don't give them out to everybody.
No.
Only the ones that ask and the ones we hand them to. All right, so you're one of our volunteers, but you're a local historian.
Yes.
And we're going to talk a bit about local history today. Mm-hmm. Before we get into that, Travis, how did you end up as a volunteer with us? Like, are you from Sonoma?
I am not. I actually grew up on the Central Coast, a little town called Cambria, and then moved back east and lived in Washington, D.C. and Europe, and then decided to go into academia. So my job was in Portland, Maine.
Wait, there's another Portland that's not in Oregon?
It's the original. You know the story? They flipped a coin. They were going to call it either Portland, Oregon or Boston, Oregon.
Shut up. Is this real?
It's real.
Wait, so these people on the banks of the Columbia River they couldn't come up with a new name? So they're like, let's steal one from the East Coast?
That was often the case, It's let's call it Wagner Town, Wagnerville,
Right.
It wasn't really, they weren't that creative. So it's the original Portland, which is a beautiful city. And then I decided that I was about done with academia. And so I moved here 9 years ago with my wife, who got a great job at the hospital. And here we are.
And when you were, for your FID, what was your academic specialty back then?
Public policy. I specialized in environmental and natural resource policy, and my undergraduate was environmental science. So I taught environmental science and environmental policy courses.
Oh, that's kind of fun. Two eager, young environmental kids.
Yes, because most of them that choose the environment are because they're very passionate.
Right.
So it's not like, let's just get a job. They tend to be pretty passionate.
Huh.
But when I was working my PhD, I focused a lot on history because in order to know where you are and where you're going, you have to know how you got here in the policy world. So I always focused in research history as well, history of policy, history of environmental.
Okay, that's actually really interesting in the sense that as I get older and I realize that someone made a decision and put a paragraph into some law, and you don't know the repercussions of that until like 30 years later, and someone says, well, this is the way we've always done it because of this law. And then you're wondering, was that a mistake when they slipped that paragraph into there? Or did they really intend for that to be that way? Because now you've got these different effects going on and cascading down. I just something I've realized as I kind of touch public policy in my professional life.
What's I forgot the Fog of War guy, but he did the famous quote, there's the known unknowns.
Yeah, of course.
Rumsfeld.
Rumsfeld, yeah.
The last part is the unknown unknown. So it's in public policy, it's the law of unintended consequences. So even though you publish it and you design it this way, you've lost control of it. And circumstances and culture and events take control of it, and really good lobbying as well.
And that brings in the poli-sci people.
Yes.
Yes. Let me tell you how laws really get me.
Yeah.
Over on K Street. Well, so now you're in history and you became kind of involved with history in Sonoma. What is your interest in Sonoma history? Like, how did this happen?
So when I lived in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, and you're completely surrounded by Civil War memorials and monuments and battlefields. And so I just had a strong interest. I've always had an interest in history. So I'd visit them and museums and so forth. And so I knew a lot about some of the famous people or infamous people. And then moving to Sonoma, I wanted to become a docent at the State Historic Park.
Okay.
So I'm a docent at the barracks, volunteer docent. I like to volunteer a lot.
Wait, you're a volunteer docent still?
Yeah, absolutely.
At
Yeah.
Sonoma State Historic Park?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
The crown jewel of the California State Park system?
Exactly, yes.
Take that, big sir.
And I started doing side research, and I noticed that a number of the commanders that were fighting in Northern Virginia, in Maryland and so forth, were actually stationed here in Sonoma. And it's like,
before the Civil War? After?
yes, yeah.
Before.
And so the 1840s.
Okay.
So they were young officers,
Gotcha.
and then they later became generals. And I was like, well, that's interesting.
Huh.
Why here? And it just seemed like a hotbed of posting for some of these individuals. And then you start learning about their history and their behaviors and their acts and their foibles. And so that's kind of what piqued my interest.
It kind of became they were real people with real problems.
Yes.
And real challenges before them.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, looking at that period, this is just prior and then during the gold rush, Sonoma, the California history during that short period was just tumultuous and explosive. So much was happening in a short period. And just reading about these individuals and
I love this.
Really fascinating.
Well, it is interesting because a lot of people come here and we talk. Okay, the physical landscape of Sonoma allows you to talk a little bit about the history, right? Because when we talk about history, oftentimes we're talking about the European contact history because that's some of the buildings that are still here. But of course, Pomo and the Patwin were here and are still here. But when we start talking about early Sonoma history, we're often talking about when the Spanish started their missions. But we didn't get the Spanish mission. We got a Mexican mission because it became Mexican independence, right? And then my understanding is it was kind of the ass end of the empire. It was like, this was not the best posting. This was like, Spain controls Mexico and Mexico is controlled way down to Mexico City. We're about as far north as you can get away from that empire.
It was as far. This was the northern edge of Mexican military administrative control, even though the border went much further.
Wait, it wasn't called the ass end of the empire? I'm sorry, what was it actually called? The northern part of it?
I'd call it the spear end. It's the depends on how you want to look at it.
Right. So, and that's what when we talk about the barracks, people are like, why were there soldiers here? So I'm going to ask you, why were there soldiers here?
Well, the primary reason is because the Russians had Fort Ross.
Wait,
remember
the Russians are coming.
The Russians were here.
Oh, no.
So if you remember, they used to own Alaska, and they were migrating down the coast. They got there 1812 when this was still Spain. They built a fort, and they decided to have all these settlements and try to grow crops all the way down to Bodega Bay to feed their settlements all the way up.
They were trying to grow actual crops on the coast.
Well, yeah. So if anyone has been to the Sonoma coast in the summer, one, it doesn't rain, and two, it's foggy. So not a good place, but I guess considering where their settlements were.
I guess better than parts of Alaska.
So after Mexico gets independence, the mission, so they were here in 1812. The mission was here, started in 1823. And Mexico decided to shut the missions down, the so-called secularization.
Okay.
So Vallejo, who was the commander of the Presidio in San Francisco, they sent him to Sonoma for three reasons. One, shut the mission down and take the land. Number two is to lay out the town of Sonoma. So the Spanish system was, Presidio, military, mission, church, and then Pueblo, civilian. Okay. So technically, Sonoma's a planned community because they had the plaza and then the tight grid streets all around. Each lot was designed for 4 houses, each with a garden, and to attract settlers up here. And then 3s build the barracks here to keep those pesky Russians from encroaching anymore into Mexico.
Keep them at bay.
Yes, yeah. And they didn't worry about the Americans because the Sierra Nevadas and deserts would keep them away
They
forever.
would never come over those hills. We're safe from those guys. So the Spaniards / Mexicans, because a lot of them were Spaniards and then became Mexican in the sense of nationality, right?
Well, they consider them, at least certainly in the northern part, they consider themselves Californios.
Californios.
They were of Mexican descent, but they viewed themselves different culturally.
Okay.
So they weren't strongly allied with Mexico, at least in the northern part.
Right.
In fact, they talked about maybe becoming independent or...
Also, there was talk pre-Bear Flag.
Yeah.
The people here, the Californios, were like, you know what?
Yeah.
Mexico City's pretty far.
Yeah.
I don't want them telling us to send taxes down there.
Exactly.
Let's just do our own thing, man.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's just that rebellion spirit. And they said, well, maybe we should hook up with the British because they're gobbling up everyone around. And
Oh, yeah.
maybe the Americans. So they were pretty...
Trying to figure out who to be.
who to be good. Or just be on their own.
And at the same time, you mentioned Russia. Russia was going through an empire rise and fall, too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this was the furthest south the Russians got in North America.
Certainly settlements, yeah.
Yeah, they probably sailed up and down.
Yeah, yeah.
They were looking for sea otter pelts, and I think maybe whale. I don't know if they were whaling as much, but it was definitely pelts.
Sea otters and seals, yeah.
Seals, yeah. And then I heard part of it was during one of these systems, they wanted the Californios, the Mexicans here, to trade back with the Mexican government and not to do a lot of commerce with the Russian government. There's kind of a law against that, like an early tariff kind of. So my understanding is that sometimes the soldiers were there to kind of keep an eye on the tax dollars. Like money goes south, doesn't go north. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, because most of the money came from the customs house in Monterey. So there wasn't much. If it didn't go through there, they didn't get the money, and they wanted all trade to go through there because that was the only tax collection.
And they weren't. Gold was not yet discovered. So what were they trading?
Yeah, cowhides and tallow. That was the extent.
Wait.
That was the extent of California. The economy was
cowhides and tallow. And tallow, as we know, is fantastic for French fries. So do you think we invented the French fry in California? Is that what you're saying?
You know, I think the Belgians would argue that.
Belgians. Jeez. All right, so we had, yeah, you're right. So it was tallow, which came out of cows.
Yeah.
And then the skin of the cow.
Yep.
And then probably beef, salted beef, or we ate the beef, I'm not sure.
Really didn't export the beef because where would you send it? You know, it took 6 months to go around,
Yeah, that's a
and
good
they
point.
didn't have much salt. So they would skin the cow. Most of it just, was, vulture food.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I didn't know that.
Food. Yeah.
So that was the pre-thing. And you mentioned Monterey. Mm-hmm. Before we go too far, I think you have a bone to pick with Monterey. According to you,
Yes.
at Monterey State Historic Park,
Yeah.
there is this
Oh,
sign
yes.
that says the first theater
Yeah.
founded by, is it by English-speaking people or just by like
Yes.
Europeans or English-speaking theater?
Yes.
Was
Americans.
Americans.
Yeah.
Was in Monterey, California.
Yes. That's the alleged claim.
That's the current thing. But however, some sleuthing by yourself has shown that perhaps Sonoma, California
I like that. Yes.
was the first theater for Americans or English-speaking theater.
Yes.
A New York-style theater.
Yes.
And is that true, or are you just saying that to get a rise out of Monterey people?
I have to speak to my attorney on that. No, first of all, so the article was researched and co-written by my colleague, Peter Meyerhoff. Yes, so we knew for a while that it was likely in Sonoma, but we decided to do a scholarly research.
Dive into the
By looking at, trying to get evidence and firsthand accounts. And sure enough, the first theater in California, there were some private theaters in rich Californios' homes, but the first actual theater that they charged for was in Sonoma in the summer of 1847. Monterey's came about a year later.
So hold on. You're not going to say it, but I'm going to say that. Okay. Take that, Monterey. We beat you. We're getting a new plaque. We had the first public paid theater.
Yes. Good luck getting a plaque from the state, but...
As I've told you, you can order anything online. That's true. You saw this. I showed you the plaque of the first brewery, the craft brewery.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The famous one on Denmark Avenue.
Yeah, New Albion Brewing Company.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the plaque's at about Tim height.
Wow.
If you look.
Oh, I got to look for that one.
Actually, you're a little taller than me. You should help me out. The other thing is that the plaque's smaller than you think. Because on a computer screen, it looks pretty big.
Yeah, good point.
And then when I arrived, Jose was just cracking up. He's like, "This is what you ordered?" I'm like, "That looks like an index card."
Like one of those license plates on the back of a bike.
Exactly. But it's there. But I do love that you brought that up, that you're doing this research and trying to see that, is it consequential in the grand scheme of things? Yes and no. Like, it's not going to change the origins of California, but I think it's important to show that we had theater and culture up here, and you should always go back and look and say, are these assumptions? Was this paragraph that was written in the policy?
Yeah.
Is that true and we've just assumed it, or maybe that's something different?
Exactly. Just because it's written, you have to verify it.
Yeah.
But I think that the interesting thing about the article is it helped explain some of the early cultural development of Sonoma. So it was California. And then when the Army came here, it was a group of volunteers, mostly recruited in the Lower East Side of New York.
Oh.
So they were, at the same time, there was the rise of working class theater, which was farce and burlesque,
Right.
which had just taken over for the highbrow British actors. And we saw a shift with American actors and loud and boisterous, as you can imagine. And a number of individuals that were recruited were semi-professional or amateur entertainers and actors. At the same time, there was a huge economic depression in New York City. So they're like, out of work actors. I like this entertainment. Let's join the Army. And that regiment, though, was specifically recruited to come to California to colonize it. So they would not give them. They said, you sign up, but we're not giving you transportation back because you need to stay.
Wait, it was a one-way ticket to California?
One-way ticket. Yeah, to California.
We were barely a state. Wait,
we weren't even a state yet. We were still a Mexican territory.
Wait. So the Army's for real?
Oh, for real, yeah.
So this was like a deliberate colonization of the colonization. So the Spanish and the Mexicans had colonized this part.
Yeah.
And then we said, we're going to colonize your colonization by sending over soldiers from the Lower East Side of New York.
Correct. Because, again, the big fear is the British. If you don't have loyal citizens, and especially soldiers, the British are going to snatch it up. And this is before they discovered gold. So these guys were like, sure, we'll go because
why
this
not?
will work.
I hear it's full of tallow and beef hides. Sounds like a great place.
We hear the French fries are amazing.
Someone bring a Belgian over. Show us how to make them. So they're over here.
Yeah, and they're posted throughout the state, San Francisco, Monterey, Santa Barbara, L.A., and they spread them all out. And they arrive here in April 1847. And the company that comes to Sonoma realized, man, there is nothing to do here. I'm sure a saloon or two quickly opened, but there was literally nothing to do. They had occasional fandango. But because they were used to this entertainment, some of them were entertainers, they said, well, let's create our own entertainment. So they started out in this little adobe building, and it was way too small. And they realized, well, it's not about just entertainment. We can actually make money. So they started over at the Salvador Vallejo Adobe, the one that is occupied by the Sunflower Cafe in EDK, and they built their theater. So, the theater was there, but they rebuilt it inside, and decorated it. And Vallejo had a private box, and they started charging. And then there was a little steamship service from San Francisco because they're like, wow, we're starved for entertainment here. We hear Sonoma is happening. How times have changed.
So a little ship would go up the Sonoma Creek, up the bay, San Pablo Bay.
To the Embarcadero.
On the creek, which is
3 miles.
3 miles south of town.
Yeah.
And they would take a horse up here.
Yep.
Or whatever. And that was their thing. It was like, come see a show.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if they had, I don't think it was a dinner theater, but.
I was going to ask, dinner and a movie?
No, it was pretty.
There was all that beef flying around.
Yeah. But it was pretty raucous. And then they discovered gold, and then they were out of the service because their service ended. Many went to the gold fields.
Okay.
And back then, though, this was 48 before the gold rush, you could just go up there and mine, and then they would come back in the winter because you don't want to be in.
Got a little snowy.
And the floods.
And
kind of bad. And because they're mining in the rivers, that's not a good place to be.
Right. Okay.
And so they came back and said, wow, okay, let's do some more theater. And they moved to the Casa Grande, Vallejo's home. And then, but after that, the gold rush came, and you couldn't leave your.
No.
And then professional actors came, and they started in Sacramento and San Francisco.
So I think, I have it on good authority. I just heard on the internet the second I post this.
Yeah.
That the first professional theater in California was in Sonoma.
Yes.
And it's near the plaque that's going to be hanging near the El Dorado Kitchen / Sunflower Cafe on Spain Street and First Street West.
And that's why visitors should come to Sonoma
right now.
Come for the history.
Especially if you're a theater person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, it is. Okay, so we were joking before we started, but like, we have so many different historical groups. Mm-hmm. One of them just walked in, George Weber. He has a radio show here, but he does tours and different stuff, and he's really into history. But we have so many people who are so devoted to history in Sonoma, and it is a actual small town. Mm-hmm. This is not a big town.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
And I have at least 5 different historical people or groups who all get along swimmingly. Usually, no comment. But it's so fun because they're putting on stuff though and talking about it and doing stuff. One thing I want to get to, and the reason why I have you here, other than the fact that it's just fun to talk to you, you put together these 2 pamphlets. We have you helped me with them. Sonoma historic sites. Yep. You kind of broke it up, 1823 to 1860. Yeah. And then 1860 to 1933. I still haven't changed the cover photos. It's driving me nuts. Yes. Now I noticed that.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's kind of like you went through it and then you noticed, I don't think the Hooker House is where it was and is now. And I said, that's crazy, Travis. No one would ever move a building. And so you went back and looked it up. You, like a true researcher, you went back and amended some information we had.
And I still have seen no actual evidence. Hooker owned the lot that house belonged. He never lived in it.
So it's the house on Hooker's lot.
That he may or may not have owned. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. But it's
it's
how
a good
stories
story.
go, but it sounds more interesting to call it the Hooker House.
Well, so this guy Hooker was ultimately a Civil War general.
Yes,
if I recall.
That's correct.
And it just so happens you wrote a book about this.
That is correct.
Tell me about it. You see that? That's called a segue in the biz.
That is brilliant. So, yes, I just finished a book. It's called Military Honor on Trial.
Wait, is that the copy right there? You can hold up to the video right now. A little closer. Oh, yeah, people online have bad eyes too. Yeah. So, Military Honor on Trial, the Saga of Joseph Hooker and George Derby.
Yes, correct.
By Travis P. Wagner.
It says you can't race sale there. It's the author's copy. But you can buy it.
You can buy it.
Yeah, you can. It's not.
It's online right now. You can buy an e-copy right now.
Yes, the ebook version and the print version and so forth is online.
Unless I'll give you like $5 for it right now.
I can't because it says no resale.
Oh, dang it!
Contractual.
You didn't fall for it.
You say 6, we'll talk.
So tell me about this book. What's this about?
So it goes back to I was here. I saw these interesting people. I knew about Hooker, and here he was. He was here, and I started learning more about him. And he was what we call a very ambitious climber. He was kind of arrogant, not kind of. He was arrogant, had narcissistic tendencies, and during this time, this antebellum period, honor was about everything. It was about your good name. Holding up values. It wasn't really a defined concept. Or it was a well-known concept, but it wasn't really well-defined.
The rules themselves weren't like, this is honor. But.
Gentlemen, and what's absolutely critical is to defend your honor, because if you don't, you're dishonorable. And honor doesn't mean that much now, especially now. But it certainly had really strong thing, and especially if you were an officer. And he and Derby were both graduated from West Point, where you learn a special code of honor.
So they were both West Point graduates?
They were West Point graduates. Derby was 1846 and Hooker was 1837. So he's a little bit younger. Okay. So after the Mexican War, Hooker is out here this is where the headquarters for the Army's Western Pacific Division, which is the Fitch House, where Valley
in
Bar.
Sonoma, we were the headquarters for the... Sonoma was.
For the entire Oregon, California, Washington for like a year and a half.
Interesting.
So with a Valley Bar.
And that was
the building.
You think it would be okay? Were we on a major? We were the end of the Camino Real, but was there logistics? Okay, they chose this spot.
Well, the reason why they chose this spot is the commander it was in San Francisco, and San Francisco in 1849 was not the place you want to be.
Right.
And it was expensive, and it was just crazy. And he's like, I don't want this. So he moves the headquarters up here to Sonoma. So it wasn't for strategic or logistical.
Okay.
It was a better quality of life.
And probably a lot of distractions for the young soldiers.
There were actually not. There was never that many soldiers. At the actual headquarters, probably like 11. They were all officers.
Okay.
So it was administrative. they moved it up here, but also the barracks was here, so the U.S. Army was here. Okay. So there was it made some sense.
Okay.
And Hooker was up here. And then George Derby, who's America's first national humorist. His pseudonym was John Phoenix and Squibob.
Okay.
So he was up here. So he was a jokester, and his favorite target was taking down people that were very arrogant and prickly, and egotistical. So the two of them did not get along.
So one of them was sort of like a stand-up comedian who kind of like craps on people.
He does crap on people. He was a full-time Army officer, but he was becoming very famous. He started writing articles that were published in the San Francisco, the Alta California. And this was during the time of Gold Rush, so his articles were not just limited to California, but they started spreading countrywide because so many people were obsessed with California.
Interested in California, so he got a bigger audience.
And he really helped develop this concept of Western humor. So, at that time, there was an explosion. There was a huge population of like 300,000 people came in a short period. But what was the culture of California? I mean, the Californios, indigenous, had been wiped out, so it was supplanted by this kind of raucous.
Right.
And he had great observational, satirical, dry humor, and people just loved it. And he was before Mark Twain or Bret Hart. So he became really famous. And he had a large group of friends and admirers, and some people that had violent reactions to his humor, especially those that they felt that their honor was being challenged.
Enter
Joseph Hooker.
And was, so this guy, full-time Army officer / part-time comedian.
Yeah.
And then Joseph Hooker, who was himself full-time Army officer.
Yes, desperate to climb up.
And he wanted to be seen as a man of honor.
Of honor and seriousness. Yeah.
So did he say, "I will have my satisfaction, sir," and slap him with a glove?
It's sort of like that. So it gets, and I'll just say that the book focuses on their conflict, and then they end up both going through courts-martial here in town, which very little is published about it. But the book also talks a lot about their history, their personality, how they come, and then what happened after the trial. So Hooker became a very famous Civil War general until he was not.
Yeah.
And then Derby became an even more famous historian, but he unfortunately died very young.
Interesting. So what were they? Were they two separate court-martial?
They were supposed to be. So, just briefly,
I know we should get the book, and everyone should order the book. But what were the charges of the court-martial? I don't understand.
Well, both of the charges were conduct unbecoming a gentleman and an officer, which is rings of honor. So what happened was, an army deserter stole Derby's horse.
Okay.
He got really upset. The deserter went to San Francisco and got caught by the Committee of Vigilance. The San Francisco Committee of Vigilance was not interested in justice. They were interested in their form of justice.
Yes, and this was during a time of incredible upheaval.
Yes.
After you said 1849, San Francisco was bonkers. People were jumping off of their ships and abandoning stuff and running into town.
Yeah.
It was
mostly young males, or almost all males.
Well, that sounds like a very stable environment.
Yes.
A bunch of 22-year-olds with no jobs.
With
and gold in their eye.
Yes. And so they catch this deserter. They bring him back to Sonoma. Derby had been advocating for his execution for a while, which is kind of seems out of character.
For stealing a horse.
It wasn't a capital crime, but nonetheless, he felt like he'd been wronged. Wow. The sheriff arrests the deserter, gives him to Derby to watch for one night, which is very interesting. Derby lets him escape. And then he got arrested by the sheriff the next day, but the grand jury refused to indict him, and Hooker said, "Nah, I'm arresting you." So he arrested Derby. And part of that is because they had this conflict going.
Okay.
And he was not going to have that. So he arrests Derby.
The sheriff does.
No, Hooker. The sheriff arrested him. The grand jury decided not to indict him, so they let him go.
And then Hooker said, "I'm going to arrest Derby."
The next day, arrest Derby.
As
for allowing a deserter to escape his office.
But he was applying civil law to a military, whatever.
Yes, yeah.
He didn't have civil authority.
Correct, yeah. So he used military authority for really a civil action.
Okay. That always ends well.
Yes.
Tell me more.
Meanwhile, Derby's like, "Oh, I got to get out of this. I know what to do. So Hooker had been purchasing hay as an Army officer at market prices and then turn around and selling it to his subordinate at above market prices called profiteering.
He was making money. Okay, was he like a quartermaster or something? He was making money off the supplies?
Yes.
For the hay?
His subordinate was the quartermaster.
Oh, my God.
He was the commander of that. So he was making tons of money, and he was using this money to buy lots, including the lot where the Hooker house is. And then he bought the ranch in Agua Caliente.
Hold on. Are you telling me that Sonoma Valley history is rife with graft and kickbacks and profiteering?
There are instances of that, yes, correct.
Oh, a little bit of Chicago right here.
Okay. And so it was like they're going after each other, counter this, counter that. Hooker gets arrested and also had to face a court-martial for conduct unbecoming a gentleman and an officer. So the plan was, and this goes back to your original question about the courts-martial, the original plan was Derby would go first and Hooker would go second. They held the court-martial where the Union Hotel was.
Okay.
It's not there anymore.
It's now a bank, I think.
Bank of America, yeah. And in the middle of it, I'll just say there was a surprise, sudden thing in which the court-martials, instead of becoming sequential, became intertwined because they had the same judges and, yeah.
Was there a showgirl involved who came in and said, he was with me last night?
Well, remember, there's no showgirls at this time. They came a few years later.
Getting ahead of myself.
It was a soldier dressed as a showgirl.
The story gets more and more interesting. Okay, so something happened, and I'm sure that's in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. In detail. It's just, and if people are interested in Sonoma Valley history, you see all these individuals are witnesses, and these famous future generals are judges, and they're witnesses.
They all knew each other. This is a small town.
Oh, yeah.
So this every day they knew all these people.
In fact, 3 of the judges on the court-martial were very close friends to Derby, and the prosecutor was a very close friend of Derby's as well. Because again, he had this. He was such a likable guy.
Oh no, man!
And he had a lot.
Backslapper, funny.
Yeah, he was one of the founders of the Masonic temple here in Sonoma.
Okay.
So he had his Masonic brothers.
He did the secret handshake.
Before I tell you about that.
Yeah, before I testify.
So it's just crazy that small town military and civilians. It was crazy.
That's kind of okay. Yeah. So we know Hooker, as you kind of tipped your hand, he was not kicked out of the Army because he went and fought in the Civil War.
Correct.
And he fought until he was a Union general.
Well,
he was kind of successful.
Actually, so
or was he?
He wasn't kicked out of the Army. He was pushed out. Oh. So if you read all the history, they just say he resigned and became a farmer. Well, that's not accurate at all.
I'm resigning to spend more time with my family.
He actually was pushed out
of the Army. Before the Civil War.
Before the Civil War in 1853, like 2 days after the court-martial, he's pushed out of the Army. Took a year or two for that to happen, and then he decides to become a gambler, then a farmer, and then a politician. He fails at all 3 in Sonoma Valley.
Oh, so he's going to stay here and farm?
He stayed here.
So he was not. Where was he from originally?
Massachusetts, Western Mass.
Okay.
He did get a couple jobs, but there's all these interesting court cases I found. He kept being sued because he had no money, in part because he lost a lot of money to the governor's brother in a gambling game.
Oh.
Right over at the Blue Wing, our Union Hotel.
Oh, no.
Yes, he was a terrible gambler. And so he was in so much trouble. He tried to find ways out, and farming was a disaster. He failed as a politician. There's the famous thing about, we lost the courthouse because of...
Oh, because of him.
Because of him.
We're still mad at Santa Rosa.
Yes. People are kind of sort of partially
still
true.
Mad at Santa Rosa.
Yeah. Well, that was, anyways, that was kind of his fault. And so eventually what happened was he decided, I'm a failed civilian. Right. I'm failing at civilian life. He tried to get back in the Army, but because I didn't get into this, but did I mention it's in the book?
Go.
It's in the book. He did some really pretty unscrupulous things during the Mexican War, and so pissed off the senior commander that when he tried to get back in the Army, that senior commander was the general chief in the Army, and he's like, Hooker, you're not getting back in.
Really?
He kept denying Hooker until the Civil War broke out, and he still kept saying, you're not in the Army, you're not getting in the Army. That guy retired.
And then Hooker got back in.
Then Hooker finally got in.
Didn't he become a general?
He became a general very quickly, And then he became the commander of the Army of the Potomac, which was the largest army in the Union Army. And he failed miserably at his one battle, Battle of Chancellorsville, which is considered Robert E. Lee's greatest victory.
Oh.
So if it's his greatest victory, it then has to be
Someone's
Hooker's worst defeat.
Someone's on the other side.
Yeah.
Oh,
and because he was kind of prickly, he made certain demands that if they weren't met, he was going to resign. So President Lincoln said, all right,
I accept.
your resignation, which shocked the heck out of him.
Who was he replaced by? Who's
George Meade. This happened about 10 days before Gettysburg. So if he hadn't resigned, it's quite possible that he would have redeemed himself.
at Gettysburg?
At Gettysburg.
You think so? You think?
I think so.
You think
It's possible.
Charges going on. You think Hooker's going to be there?
I don't
Come
know.
on.
It's hard. It's really, history is what if. You can never.
That's right.
It's like, I don't know.
And it's just based on what people write. So
Yeah.
it's written by the victors, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
Supposedly.
So, and then he had another series of things that just didn't go well.
Okay.
And he had built up a number of enemies, including William Tecumseh Sherman,
Oh.
who was there heavily involved, and they let him have it. And just some of the personal letters between him and Henry Halleck. Henry Halleck was the prosecutor of the court-martial.
Oh.
He became filthy wealthy in San Francisco, and he became the general-in-chief of the Army.
Oh, okay.
So, and they kept saying, wow, because of Hooker's behavior in California, we're not going to let him do that. Because he was the
I'm just surprised.
backstabber.
What I know from remembering my history, Les, is that you don't want to piss off William Tecumseh Sherman.
That's true.
He will
Yes.
take it out on your railroads.
He will march. He will march.
He will march all over you. And holy cow. Okay, this is a great book. What's the name of it again?
Military Honor on Trial,
Okay.
the saga of Joseph Hooker and George H. Derby, a.k.a. Squibob and John Phoenix.
Squibob.
I got to say one thing about Derby, just if I could.
Yeah.
So after he was here for a while, and then he got posted to San Diego.
Okay.
And after the trial, he just exploded with his humor because he stopped writing humor and had all this humor pent up. But his greatest prank was the editor of the San Diego Herald. So back then, newspapers were nakedly partisan.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so it was a Democratic paper. Mm-hmm. And he decided to go to San Francisco. His name was Ames, to collect his political rewards from the then governor, who was a Democrat.
Gotcha.
So he was friends with Derby. Mm-hmm. I said, "Hey, would you mind taking over editor of my paper while I'm gone to San Francisco for these few weeks?"
Oh, no.
And Derby says, "Heck yeah."
You're going to give me the press?
So Derby, he was a Whig. Republicans didn't exist then. And he wasn't really strong political, but he was a prankster. So he decides when he leaves to completely change the paper to support the Whig candidates. But he did it very humorously. But people took it seriously. So he actually flipped San Diego County from a Democratic to a Whig
Really?
thing. But meanwhile, this guy Ames is in San Francisco meeting Governor Bigler to get his reward. And he was completely oblivious about this. So he's up there asking, "Hey, I'm a great supporter." And Bigler has a paper, the San Diego Herald, and shoves it in his face. So the meeting ended.
Oh, my God. He's like, "I'm here for my patronage." No, you're not.
So
No,
Derby's
you're
like,
not.
"Yes."
That's amazing.
Yeah. He's pretty,
That is very clever.
yeah.
This is, it's actually, there's a modern day analogy. I don't know if do you remember, speaking of podcasts, InfoWars?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And The Onion has taken over
yes.
the InfoWars.
Yeah.
And they've done such a good job of satirizing and parodying it, and it's just beyond ridiculous.
Yeah.
That you took something that was patently ridiculous. Now, this wasn't Democrats and Whigs at all, but it was, crazy and crazier.
Yeah.
That is interesting that
Yeah.
he flipped it from doing it that way. Well, and that's why, whenever I go to San Diego, I feel a little out of touch because there's so many Whigs there. WHIG Whigs.
Yes.
The old San Diego Whig party. That was a while ago.
Yeah, that was 1850, 52, 54. That was for the 1854 election.
Goodness me. If people want to order that book, Travis, how do they get that?
Amazon.
Okay.
And then the ebook is available so many places, and hopefully it will be in actual bookstores in a while.
Soon.
Six weeks or something. I don't know. It takes a while.
It's got to come around the Cape.
Yeah.
For the big printing presses. And then maybe readers' books might have it. Or
Hopefully, and the bookstore is what the little shop in the barracks.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Because I'm giving a couple talks, and so they'll try to sell the books.
And when we have the physical copy, can we put one at the visitor centers? They pick this up next door.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
We'd definitely like to do that.
yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely.
I was going to, you've filled in a lot of stuff here because I was ready to talk all the bunch of history stuff about Sonoma, like
is that part
cemetery. Well, no, I mean, we've filled in a lot because you're going to help me answer questions. You know
Yes,
that, right?
yeah.
But I do want to point out that when people do come to the visitor centers,
Yes.
we do have a lot of information, like the whole thing about the mission, which is not called the Sonoma Mission.
No.
A lot of people don't know that. Mission San Francisco Solano.
Yes.
Although, the San Francisco mission is not called the San Francisco mission.
Dolores. Yes.
So, and the LA mission is not called, it's like a 15,
yes.
it's a very long name.
Yeah.
And we also have this really neat Sonoma Plaza historical sites map that we give out that kind of lists all the different things, including the Vallejo home, Swiss Hotel, the barracks, Bear Flag Monument. Interesting about the Bear Flag Monument is like that's a good example of the history of people looking back at history. Or historiography, where you kind of talk about what they were at that time.
Yeah.
7 Flags over Sonoma. We talk about that.
Yeah.
We talk about the historical timeline. People may not know, but supposedly Sir Francis Drake may or may not have seen the Sonoma coast. Do we think that's true? They say it went to Drake's Bay.
It's possible. Yeah, I don't,
And maybe Magellan stopped. Is that true?
I don't know. Yeah.
Or is this stuff that amateur historians make up?
Sometimes you look at little bits of piece of evidence, and then with that you develop a yarn. I mean, a thorough historical analysis. I mean, it's possible.
Right.
So,
You never know.
yeah.
And then
Unless it was August, then you couldn't see it because it was foggy.
Well, the Bay of San Francisco was discovered from land during the De Anza expedition because the Spanish kept sailing past it because it was foggy and the entrance is hard to see.
Yeah.
That's why they had to build that big orange bridge so you knew that's where the bay was.
That makes sense. It's a
People
welcome sign.
People didn't even know about it until 1937.
Yeah.
And then we have like stuff like the Mountain Cemetery walking tour, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely.
You've been up there, right?
I have. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And the Historical Society actually gives tours
of
the mountain cemetery. So yeah.
I think we should do more activities up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, all that information is available at the visitor center.
Yes.
As well as like the SonomaPlazaHistory.com. They have a bunch of videos. Actually, right now we have the banners up. And they're talking about
saw those,
yeah, we used to have a Chinatown here.
Yeah.
And all the different groups that were living here. And it was very interesting. So, okay. So, and if, by the way, people can find more information from you, go onto Amazon, find Military Honor on Trial by Travis Wagner.
Yes.
Piled higher and deeper, but not a historian. You're very clear. That's not my PhD. But you're sustainable.
Only because my historian colleagues would just cringe.
Historian colleagues, you guys are the biggest stick in the... Look here, Doris Kearns Goodwin. I'm talking to you. All those other people. Sometimes you just can't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
That is often true, yes.
Yeah, that's actually... My AP history class, he did not like me saying that, though.
Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah.
All right, Travis, you might be pretty good at this next segment. Travis, that we have 2 visitor centers, and people call us and text us.
Yeah.
They walk in, they slide into our social media feeds, and they ask us all sorts of questions. And we actually, this might shock you, we have professional staff and dedicated volunteers to answer questions.
Yes.
You're going to help us, Travis, in a segment we call We Get Questions.
If I win, do I get a sticker before my 5-year anniversary?
You get a sticker. Someone came in and this is funny because I'm asking a guy who does this every week for us, but here we go. Someone came in and they asked, what wineries in Sonoma Valley are family owned?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Good question. And you can say, you don't have to say all of them, but are there any that you can think? Because, people don't know. Not that it matters. Grapes, delicious, all sorts of places. But are there any family-owned wineries?
Well, there's Larson.
Great. Larson's a good one.
Robledo.
Robledo's a fantastic one. There's so many.
Exactly.
The problem is you're going to have to start from either north to south to think about it, or south to north. If I had the map, Schermeister.
Oh, that's right, Schermeister.
Yeah,
Wine Snob.
Wine Snob,
Yeah,
good
yeah,
job. They're
yeah.
family. And oftentimes their name isn't always on the label. Like Schermeister is a family name, but Wine Snob, not their name.
Nope. Yeah.
Although if it was, then you're born to become a wine snob. Hamilton up there in Kenwood.
Oh, that's right. Yes, the very nice couple. Yes,
Nice couple.
Yeah.
San Giacomo.
Oh, yes, yeah.
This one's a tricky one. Jacuzzi is owned by the Klein family, but Jacuzzi is a family name too.
Oh, interesting.
And both Klein and Jacuzzi are family.
So that's families owned.
Families, yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite is Little Family Vineyards.
Yep, that's a
The
good one.
vineyards are small, but the family's name is Little.
Yes,
So it is Little Family Vineyards.
that's a good one.
There's a ranch up in Glen Ellen on the right-hand side.
Not Hamel.
Close. It rhymes with Schmeltane.
Oh, Beltrain.
Beltane Ranch,
yeah,
yep.
Beltrain.
Up there.
Oh, Deerfield.
Deerfield Ranch,
Yeah.
Did I say Loxton already?
Loxton.
Loxton family owned. Highway 12. Yeah, it's Paul. It's Paul and they're family-ish. Actually, you're right. They're not family owned. They're individual owned.
Yes, yeah.
But anyway, Paul Justo is one of the owners, and
Yeah.
his dad talks to me all the time.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's a whole bunch. Cassidy Ranch. Cassidy Ranch is family.
yes,
So
yeah.
there are a lot of family-owned wineries. Still a crucial part of our economy.
Absolutely.
And they're all out there. But yeah. Okay, here's another one. What time do the bathrooms in the plaza open?
Well, see, my shift when I come in,
Right.
it's 11 o'clock, so they're always open.
The bathrooms are open by then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
9?
Yeah, even earlier than that sometimes. You're right. They'll be open by 9.
Yeah.
Brian kind of keeps track of the plaza and stuff. He's there early. He's so good at opening them up first thing. So the bathrooms in the plaza, if you can get there before Brian, then you are up early. But they're open fairly early, but definitely by 9 o'clock they're open. By 8 o'clock they're open. And the bathrooms behind us, you get a lot of questions about where are the bathrooms.
Yeah, and so it was pointed out to me the other day that I tell people if they're the state park is go around through the plaza, through the dirt. And they're like, no. Have them go through the barracks because then they can see our lovely museum and a gift shop.
That's so much easier.
Isn't it? But they get to see stuff that
That's a
they might
smart
wanna
way.
Yeah.
Because you know what? If there's one thing, if you are anxious and need relief, it should be a nice trip.
Yeah.
And educational.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's a cannon.
Yes.
And there's some barracks. And there's a gift shop on the way back.
Exactly. Yeah. So they can get their Sonoma, I Heart Sonoma
Who
T-shirt.
told you that?
Sharon Douglas.
Sharon's so smart.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, good job, Sharon. Okay, question someone else asked us is, should a person tip the tour guide on a bus?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Answer, yeah. I would say most tour guides, if they're bus driver tour guides, they're not just driving you, they're also talking and telling you what's going on. And if you're able to, and if you feel open to it, a tip is always appreciated. So, yeah, you should. However, in America, we don't tip the bus driver for the county transit. So think about that. Do you think if they pointed stuff out along the way, we would just throw them a little dollar?
They just need a little microphone and give a tour.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like right
And
over
hopefully
here.
you're not a regular rider. It's like, I've heard this before.
Oh my God, I know.
I'll tip you if you don't say anything.
Go to the
today.
bathroom by going to the barracks. You said it yesterday. Okay, please, here's another question for you. Settle this once and for all. Is it the Sonoma Square or is it the Sonoma Plaza?
Oh, it's the plaza.
What?
It's the plaza. It's shaped like a square because it's historic. It's always been a plaza. Historically, it's
Why?
a plaza.
What's a plaza?
Because that's how it was created.
Okay.
So it was a plaza.
Plaza.
Because it's based on, remember, Sonoma's a planned community.
Okay.
In the classic Mexican style. It's the large plaza, public plaza, largest in California. So I view it as that's the historical name.
Right.
Granted, it's shaped like a square.
Although technically, if you look at it, he did lay it out a
little bit,
little
yeah.
canted.
Yeah.
You're right. So it's not a square.
Yeah.
If you want a square, you go to a different town. In Healdsburg, we have a plaza. Healdsburg. My problem is Healdsburg they call it a plaza, but it's not.
Yeah.
That should be a square.
Yeah.
Because they're smaller and they were founded by a guy from Ohio.
Yeah, it's much smaller. Yeah. It's cute, but.
So Sonoma has a plaza.
Yes, yeah. But a lot of people call it the square.
Oh, it makes
I
you
cringe.
Yeah. What also is kind of interesting is that in other countries, a plaza is a name for like an indoor mall. So I had a group from Australia ask me where the mall was, and I'm like, "Why would you think there's a mall here?"
Yeah.
So I sent you gotta go to Santa Rosa. It's like 40, and they no. I said, "Well, what is the plaza?" I said, "You're standing on it." So there was a little miscommunication.
Yeah. It's like the mall in Washington.
Oh, the Great Washington Mall.
It's a
Washington
mall. Yeah. But I don't know why they ever call it that. But
I think mall comes from another word meaning there's stuff along the sides of something.
Yeah.
And there's a space in the middle where stuff happens.
Could be like Pall Mall in London.
Yeah.
Well, let's just make that up.
Yeah. I believe they named that portion of London after the cigarettes.
Mr. Paul, yes, the inventor of tobacco.
See, we're going to run a paper. What's going to happen?
Oh, absolutely,
Thank you. Final question we got was just this morning, and it's apropos. What's up with all the different kinds of flags around the plaza?
Ah, yes.
What's up with all those flags?
So the flags, it's not,
You know them?
it's the flags over Sonoma. So Sonoma County, so different countries. So we have Spain, because this was part of the Spanish Empire.
Okay.
Sir Francis Drake claimed it for England, but never actually really came
Oh,
here.
really? I hear he had a beer on the Sonoma Plaza. Or maybe it was on the square.
Yeah, he was in the square.
For that it was a square because he was British.
And then the Russians, who were never in Sonoma, but they had Fort Ross and the really bad farming. Then the Mexican Empire, they got its independence in 1821, but that lasted 2 years, and then it became a Mexican republic.
So we were Mexican Empire, Mexican Republic.
Correct.
Okay.
And the bear flag, which is the glorious, free, independent California Republic for 25 days.
I remember it so well.
Yes.
So
And then-
it lasted less long than like the month of February.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then America.
In the United States.
Yeah, the U.S. flag.
So that's why we have those flags. Usually you see them in City Hall. I think the Plaza Bistro has a bunch of flags over it. People will often fly the different types of flags.
They're actually inside the soon-to-be Sonoma Valley History Museum, which will be opening in a few months.
I am very excited about
Yes.
that. Patricia Cullinan's been talking about it for a long time.
Yes.
And I keep saying, when it's open,
Yes.
make sure I know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I saw a little model they're working on of like the City Hall.
The City Hall, that's a 3D printed model.
Yeah.
And it's coming together. So it'll.
I can't wait for that to open.
Yeah.
At Depot Park.
Yeah.
And right there on the train.
Another great thing for our lovely visitors, and it's free.
I wonder if they'll sell your book.
Was that?
Will they sell your book there?
I don't believe they're having any sales. That gets complicated.
It does get
Yeah.
complicated. You absolutely. And
Taxes
look at me. Look at me.
Yeah.
Here I am trying to. I'm pulling
Well,
a
thank
little.
you, though. Yeah, thank
I'm
you.
pulling a little of a hooker by trying to like make some money off some stuff.
Yeah.
On public land. Apologies.
Yeah, no. It's brilliant. But
get
you have to have
court-martialed.
Square and you have to have Venmo. It's just like
So many things.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question, there are so many flags over Sonoma because it does kind of represent the different European and then American nations that laid claim to this area.
Imperialism.
Imperialism.
Yes.
Yeah, there you are.
And colonialism.
And colonialism. And I think the Russians, supposedly there was a group of Mexican or Californios who traipsed over to meet the Russians somewhere because they hiked from here to there.
Mm-hmm.
There was like a embassy mission, basically, because that Camino de Sonoma, which is a group of people who walk from Sonoma to Fort Ross, it's part of their pilgrimage / a recreation of that historic multi-day trek.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that's kind of neat. So, wow, I'm shocked you answered them all correctly.
Well,
Hey Travis,
Yeah, thanks.
what are you doing in the afternoons at 11 o'clock on Wednesdays?
I would really
You want to come on
like to
volunteer?
bump up my game there. Yeah.
So you answered them all correctly, so you passed the test.
Oh, thank you.
Good job. You bet.
Where's my sticker?
I'll get you one.
Okay. Thank you.
Travis, it's been wonderful having you
Thank
here.
you. It's
so
been
thank
great.
you.
Yeah.
Again, the name of the book is Military Honor on Trial by Travis P. Wagner, The Saga of Joseph Hooker and George H. Derby,
AKA Squibob.
Squibob. And you can find out how the comedian went up against the narcissist
Yes.
and how it ended.
Yes.
So go order that book right now or wait for it to come out in print and buy it in person. After you've done that, please go to cinemavalley.com for deals, special offers, and events. And then come and visit and talk to our wonderful volunteers, of which Travis is definitely one of the top 30. Is that right?
I thought there was only 29.
You're the top 30.
Oh, okay. Woo,
There
thanks.
you are. All right, everyone, thanks for listening. Mom and Dad, thanks for listening. Hope you guys are having a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.